rise. No problem at all. Welcome to our budget hearings for the year 2015. Tonight is our third budget night. We have a pretty packed agenda tonight with some pretty tough topics, so we'll try to get through these as quickly as possible. I'm going to ask our head of human resources, Mrs. Mary Carol Merrilies, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening. The flag is in the back.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we sit, I'd like everyone to remain standing. It's been a tragic week in Fairfield. We lost two of our citizens in a horrible house fire. Actually, it hit a little close to home as the young lady, the 19-year-old, was a daughter of my classmates. Daughter was a classmate of my daughter's from kindergarten all the way through senior year in high school. And she's a very special young lady, and as my daughter told me, her mother was just a fantastic lady who took care of her all 19 years of her life in a very difficult situation. So it's a shame when the town loses people like that. We'd like to remember them as well as all the efforts of our first responders who tried to save them. In addition, one of our predecessors on the Board of Finance, and a very special person, she served as our state representative, she served in our fire commission. She was of the opposite party, so she and I disagreed a little bit, but I consider her a great friend, as we all do on this board, and the Board of Selectmen. Sue Barrett lost her father, and she's a special lady, and the town is lucky to have her, and I can only think we're lucky to have her due to the way her mom and dad raised her. So I'd like to include him in a moment of silence as well. Thank you very much. Mr. Walsh, did you have something?
No, I'll avoid that, actually.
Okay.
I will ask for it for the next time, though, please.
Okay. Tonight, as we talked about, we have items on our agenda include the contingency budget for the town, the legal services budget for the town, the risk management service budget for the town, the internal service fund and human resources administration discussion this evening, which is kind of an ongoing discussion throughout this budget process. In the finance area, we're going to be discussing purchasing, the administrative services, the Board of Finance budget, unemployment compensation, and debt services. Now, fair warning, there are a couple of topics within this budget, specifically risk management and our contingency fund, where we're going to go into private executive session. So we're going to leave the room collectively with the town's attorney so that he can apprise us of any situations which may impact those budgets. The reason we do this is it could be legal strategy. It could be items that, if they were discussed in public, would not be beneficial to the town. So we do that each and every year, and we'll do that this evening for a half an hour to 45 minutes or so. The first budget we're going to discuss tonight is actually listed second. We can do this in public, and it's going to be our legal services budget. I think, Mr. Walsh, you wanted to excuse yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to recuse myself from this budget.
Great, thank you, and we'll call you back into the room.
Oh, you don't have to.
No, we will. We're going to go, this would be budget number 1270 in our budget books, and if I could get a little help with the page number, that'd be most appreciated. Thank you very much.
What is it, sir?
103. You can stay right there. We don't have you can come closer to the middle. Thank you, Mr. Lesser. Is this going to be a problem for the microphone to pick up any comments of our?
You should go to the table.
Okay, so let's do that. When Mr. Kiley's not here, you can sit there. My apologies, Mr. Lesser. Okay, so the budget is on pages 103 and 104, and we'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, very briefly, we made a request of $550,000 for fiscal year 15, and the selectmen's budget is, the Board of Selectmen is $500,000, which is a reduction from last year. We were approved for $620 last year. The reduction is based on experience from this year. And our two main drivers have been labor and tax appeals for the past few years. Actually, the tax appeals was really probably the biggest, and we're essentially done with them. There's maybe a half a dozen left, 8, and we'll expect to get a few more this year, but nothing significant. So we reduced that amount, but from what I understand, we have some labor contracts coming up that are going to be, we're going to be working on in the next year. So we increased the budget for labor for this year. So the total amount we asked for is is $550. We're being given $500,000, which it should be okay. We're projecting to spend fiscal year 14 about $463,000. I mean, that's give or take. You never can tell what's going to pop up, but I think we managed to get rid of a lot of tax appeals sooner than we thought, which was good.
Can I, thank you. I know, before I turn it over to board members for questions, I know one thing that always comes out, can we get a breakdown of that budget by type of matter? I know you're not going to give it to us by matter, but how much is labor, how much is tax appeals, how much?
Actually, there's a
Where am I
handout.
missing?
That came in the email
Second page of
today.
handout.
Oh, that's right, it
Well,
came
the
today.
the first
My
page
apologies.
is that, the second page is by current fiscal year.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the projected budget.
yeah, but that's,
No, this is
okay,
fiscal year.
so you do have it for this year, my
Yeah,
apologies.
it's the far right, well, that's what we're asked, that's how it comes.
Yeah,
out.
this came today, right?
That's the breakout.
That was
Yesterday?
emailed yesterday.
Okay, I missed this one, completely missed it, thank you.
No, that's by it. I don't think-
All right, do we have questions on this
I just wanted it by category.
from board members?
Which is the same as this, yeah.
Just one, Tom.
Please.
That's the
Stan?
I'm sorry.
That's okay, I apologize. On one hand, this is a tough budget to, for us to approve or not approve, because obviously things, like you said, come up during the year that may not have been anticipated, and obviously we spend what we have to spend in order to protect the town and to do the things you do. I'm just curious, A, why, if there's any, I mean, it's good news that you're coming in so far below the budget from 14, so maybe a little explanation as to why, $160,000 less than the budget is terrific, assuming your projections are correct, right? You're projecting 462 versus 620.
Yes.
And then, I'm just curious, you explained why you want the labor to go up, I understand that. Why do you have litigation going up 40-odd thousand versus what you're projecting for the current 12-month, current budget year?
It's because of some cases that are pending.
Okay.
And could-
So actual stuff that's in the hopper?
Yeah, or anticipated, yes.
Okay. And any reasons, good or, obviously, that are to the good, for the big reduction in the, versus the budget last year?
A lot of it's tax appeals. That's what the reduction is.
Okay.
We were spending $240,000, $250,000 a year on tax appeals, and that's pretty much gone.
Gotcha. Okay.
There are still some, the ones that are left are probably going to have to be tried. They didn't settle. So we're leaving money in for the tax appeals, but a large portion of it is tax appeals.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? I do have a couple. It does look, okay, if we look at general,
Yes.
so you're going up just a little bit there, flat essentially, right? And that's day-to-day items?
Yeah, yes.
All right, litigation. Now, we might not be able to talk about this there, but you're going up substantially there.
Litigation covers lawsuits brought against the town. Slip and falls, car accidents, suits like that. We've had some suits filed against us. I don't really want to go into the nature of them here, but they just have to be litigated. And that's what this covers.
Okay, it's a
They're
very,
mostly-
it's a very specific amount of 163,000.
Yeah.
How are the amounts calculated?
It's just based on what we feel we're going to need for the coming year. I mean, listen, it's litigation, so cases could settle or they could drag out longer. So it's difficult when you're trying to project what your litigation costs are going to be to put a fine point on it.
Okay. Tax appeals, we talked about a little bit. Employment and labor. So, and maybe it's Mr. Tetra or Mr. Mayor, whomever can answer it. So we're at $65,000 year-to-date, $112,000 for the end of the period, and $166,000 for next year. Remind us of the status of the contracts so that we can figure this out.
This covers both contract negotiations as well as possibly other employee grievances or some other employee issues
Right.
that might come up. But the big bulk of it is contract negotiations. I don't mean to distract from that.
Right.
There are 4 contracts we're currently negotiating.
Okay. What are those for, if you don't, please, just remind me.
Mid-managers, THEA, which is office workers, fire, and police.
The fire and police.
Yes.
And those are currently active negotiations.
Correct.
So they're included in the projected amount for this 12-month period.
Well, they're included in the current year budget as
That's what
well
I'm
as the
saying.
projected amount for next fiscal
Okay.
15.
So now go to.
And now we may be fortunate enough to come to resolutions on those this year and may not need that. So this next year's budget is kind of a combination of where we think we'll be or how much of these might continue over into next year
Sure.
versus 3 new contracts that end in June. And
June of this year, so they're
June of
re-upping for
14,
next year.
which will be starting negotiations next year.
So there's,
What are those?
yeah,
DPW,
yep.
ECC, and nurses.
So you're going to have ongoing, potentially, with whatever these 4 do not settle by June, you'll have some amount of ongoing costs related to those. And then you'll have costs related to the 3 contracts that'll be up.
To the start of those, correct.
He'll be up in a second.
I'm sorry, I missed the first one. There were 4, mid-manager?
THEA,
THEA, oh, thank you.
fire and
And
police.
THEA is the Town Hall Employees Association, or the office.
Yep.
Yep.
I just didn't hear you say anything.
Okay, so in essence, you're transferring funds from what we spent on tax appeals this year over to what you think might be an employee and labor next year, as well as your goosing litigation.
Yeah, I guess you could look at it that way, but the practical side is they're independent silos, so
I
they're
understand.
not related to each other. So we're literally estimating the labor costs within that labor bucket as if none of the other 2 existed. Tax appeal work has its own cycle.
Right.
And as we wind down on that, we've got, as Stanton said, a few cases left. I think the majority of those are commercial, which
Right.
are a little bit more involved.
Or large residential.
And tend to both take longer and potentially take a little bit more litigation work.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say this in a bad way, but these, and I just, for my own, and I'm not asking for specifics here in public, but these estimates were not worked up on a case-by-case basis, correct?
No. Which estimates are you talking about now?
Any of these? Basically, what...
No,
what-
they're
Yeah, because
not.
when I look at these numbers, it's kind of a, for lack of a better word, and I don't mean it in the negative connotation, these look like plug numbers to come to the $500,000.
Well, they weren't really plugged, but you can't go really on a case-by-case basis, at least not for what we do.
Yeah, they are, I mean, to that degree, if your question is, are they really estimates, or is there some way to do a bottoms-up kind of, no, they're
Yeah.
estimates from that standpoint.
I'll talk about it a little more in executive session.
Okay, which is fair. I'm just trying to get around it, because as others have commented, we're at 462 now. Tax appeals, which have been the main driver, are going away. You do have a few unions coming on board, I guess, but there's some others that are settling, so you could argue that maybe that washes out. It looks a little bit on the heavy side, to me, just based on what's been going on this year, but I'll reserve comment till I hear more from you privately.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
a couple of points of reference. You know, the actual in 2012 was $820,000.
Yeah, and how much of that was tax appeals?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. The budget that was presented to the board for 13 was 720, got reduced by the board to 600, we came in at 708. You know, the number is not an exact number, so when you budget a number that's not an exact number, it's going to be a round number.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But I just want to know what the basis is
Yeah.
for the round numbers.
And one of the reasons... that
Because a round number, you could look and say, one should be 130, one should be
I know.
160,
It's
one
like
should
kinda
be
like-
40, and one should be
Right.
170.
And one of the reasons that we're probably lower than we anticipated on employer labor is that some of those, some of the legal participation in the union contracts has been delayed.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt?
The 2 years you named, the bigger dollar, had a lot of the train station legal fees in there as well, correct? Those are major drivers those years, no?
No, those basically hit the train station.
Yeah, there's going to be,
So
yes.
those aren't included then?
Mr. DeWitt, the answer to that is unfortunately yes and no. Okay. All right, there was the, what I'm going to call the train station-specific legal fees
Yep,
went into the train station project.
okay.
Okay.
Not included in those numbers?
Correct. However, there were some other fees that were kind of related to that, but not involved in what I'm going to call the completion of the project, that did get charged to the town legal account. That's where the yes and no comes from.
Okay.
So I don't mean to, it's not 100% either way.
No, understand.
The issue, if it was train station specific, involved in getting the project done, closing on the land, getting contracts negotiated, that type of thing, that went into the train station budget and did not hit the town legal department. Right.
And I'm assuming none of the breakdown for 2014 has any of that in there either, right? That other train station data?
Might have been a little bit, some of my bills, but I don't know what you charge.
Yeah, I think at this point, we're
Might have
really
been a
down
small
to
amount.
some very small amount of
Yeah.
the train station. It's just dotting some i's, crossing some t's. We basically are working with Conservation to kind of clear up some points on their checklist. From the town standpoint, we're done. We do need to discuss that done with Conservation, because they get the final say on dotting i's and crossing t's. We're in the process of doing that. But there's not, and there's a couple closeout documents we need with the state in terms of transferring some parking spaces and some land back and forth, that type of thing that has been agreed to actually for a while, but the state moves with all deliberate speed.
Lucky.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
Mr. DeWitt's point still stands in that the 2 years referenced by the CFO were anomalies given the activity as well as the large amount of tax appeals that we had
I
during
think,
those couple of years.
I think Mr. Mayor's takeaway was that the estimates that we gave prior to being adjusted were fairly close to what the actuals came in at. So I think he was just trying to reinforce the legal estimates have been pretty close to actual for those years.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions on this item? All right, seeing none, can we go grab Mr. Walsh? Can somebody, thank you, Mary.
Want to make the initial motion? Move along.
Yeah, we can do that. At this point, I'll entertain any motions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Brockfeld.
I think I'd like to make a motion that we move into the executive session to discuss some appropriate matters.
Private executive session.
Private executives.
Do I have a second to that? Mr. DeWitt, I'm going to ask for a vote on this. All in favor of moving into private executive session to discuss risk management and contingency? Those opposed? Abstentions? We're going to go into private executive session. We'll excuse ourselves to across the hall, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Remember, we cannot take any documents or writing implements into this session. Thank you. Can I have a vote to bring us back into public session? Mr. Brockfeld, can I have a second to that motion? Mr. Walsh? All in favor of returning to public session? Those opposed? Abstentions? We're in public session now. All right. We're going to move along to the Internal Service Fund review. And I'm going to quickly turn it over to Mr. Mayor so that you can walk us through our guests and who's here. So, Bob, please.
Yes.
This is Department 1330. It is also Human Resources. So this entire thing is Miss Mary Carol Merrilee's fault. Right. Okay.
Oh,
Bob?
yes. Yeah,
Let's go.
You received something in your emails that, yesterday, that was the internal service review projected through June 30, 14 and June 30, 15. You also asked for handouts to be given hard copy. Well, today, even though these numbers are very large numbers, but the Board of Ed said they had a $25,000 adjustment to make to their schedules. So what I'm going to hand out now, or Caitlin's going to hand out now, is not what you got on your email, but it's the new one with the $25,000 adjustment. That way the number will reference to what the Board of Ed is bringing tonight. Otherwise, there'd be $25,000 difference. Not that $25,000 is a major number.
Thank you.
It's not a major amount relative to the size of the accounts.
Did we get that email, the new sheet? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, but you got it.
No. Oh, trust me then.
Yeah, thank you. Put that in front here so as others speaking.
Thank you.
Now that it's been handed out, it'll be posted, it'll be on the website.
Yeah, I can pull that.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Mayor. I think everybody has it.
Thank you. How about me?
So the Internal Service Fund is really made up of 4 categories. Account 360, which is a combination of workers' comp and general and property liability claims, and the town medical and the Board of Ed medical. Looking at the top page of the handout, you see that the fund balance for the risk management account, again, combination of workers' comp and general and property claim liabilities, the fund balance accrual basis was, at the beginning of the year, was $7,023,000. The projected activity to the end of the year is going to produce a net profit in that account. Net profit's not the right word. Excess of revenues over expenditures of $947,000, which reduces the fund balance. Reduces the negative fund balance. The accrual, as you can see, is $10 million. That's the anticipated accrual will be for these accounts. $9,800,000 of which is workers' comp, $500,000 which is legal for general liability and town property claims. And then you have a cash balance of $4 million that offsets that. The difference between the projected fund balance, accrual base is $6 million, and the accrual, $10 million, is basically the cash balance. The town medical, again, going through the numbers a little bit, beginning year fund balance, $2,007,000, excess of expense of revenues over expenses of $610,000, going down to what's called the net profit and loss line, and then with an accrual of requirement of $632,000, so the cash balance there is $392,000. So you can see that the fund balance on the town medical side is a positive $3,360,000. The Board of Ed, the third column, their fund balance, again, at the beginning of the year was $1,001,000. They are looking this year at a deficit of $1 million. Now, again, remember, this is based upon information through January. We will get new information from Mr. Lundgren and Eric Fiedler in about 10 days. And these numbers will then change, but this is where it stands today. And then when you add it all up to go to the far right column, we have the accrual fund balance, and this is the number, the reading. You just look at the negative $3,146,000. the projection for the end of this year is an improvement of about $555,000 to end the year at $2,591,000. Okay, now you turn the page.
Time out here. Before we turn the page, so this is our current projection as of June 30th, 2014.
This is our current projection, projected through June 30, 2014.
So on an accrual basis, we're at a negative $2.6 million
Correct.
projected. On a cash basis, we're at a positive roughly $10 million, $9.9 million.
Correct.
Just for curiosity's sake, last year when we looked at this, where did we think we would be as of June 30th, 2014? Do you know?
Did we added in $500,000 last year, correct?
I believe we did. I'm just trying to figure out where we thought we
Right,
would
so
be.
that means we thought we would be at about right where we are.
Can we check
Minus
that?
$100,000, yes.
Can we check that?
Yeah.
I want to see where we ended up. Is there any other questions on this page, everybody? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Because basically what you see is we had the profit and loss total is nets into that $500,000 just by accident, but that's where it ends up.
Yeah, but I don't know what our projection was last
Right.
year at this time for the last
Yeah.
4 months of the year.
Right, and what I'm saying is, if we added the $500,000, that's what it would have been, yes, but we don't know for certain yet. Turn to the next page.
Okay, so you're carrying over at the top of the page, you're carrying over that fund balance on an accrual
Yeah, actually,
basis.
if you look at the top number in the far right column, you see that same $2,591,000 is right there. And as long as you pointed to that column, Mr. Chair, you might follow that down to the third number from the bottom. You see that number, that deficit grows to $4,075,000. And if you go across the fourth line from the bottom, without going into the detail, you see that we're anticipating, given current budget and current healthcare information through January data, you see we're projecting a net positive revenue on the risk management of $100,000. We're projecting $119,000 on the medical and a negative $1,700,000 on the Board of Ed medical, for a net of $1,484,000 to that 2,591, bringing us a deterioration, if you will, of $1,500,000.
Right, so the key number here is the $1.5 million diminution in the projected fund balance on the accrual basis, as well as, I might point out, on the cash basis. Surprise, surprise, how that works.
And basically, this situation has arisen because of the significant deterioration in the Board of Ed medical account from the numbers that they initially used in their budget, which was the estimated healthcare expenditures through October, versus the current January information. Basically, the October numbers that were used in the initial Board of Ed budget would have had them break even for the year, approximately. So we would have been, it would have been a no change situation had those numbers not deteriorated.
Okay, so we're going to turn to page 3, which was handed out, that Ms. Munsell handed out. And I should note, Dr. Title did express his regrets in not being here. The reason we're in this room tonight is because they have a Board of Education meeting at the same time at their area. So he asked the Business and Finance Director to be here for this. And thank you for coming. But this schedule purports to show the impact that the last several months of claims experience has had on the fund balance. Okay, does somebody want to walk us through this, just so that we make sure we understand this one? You might have to speak into a mic just for the public to be able to hear. Do you want to come up here, maybe? You can sit right here.
You go, what, actually,
Well, I think that
is this better? A little more room behind here, but okay.
By the way, I think this is the definition of a rose between two thorns.
Excuse me?
Go right ahead.
Okay, the purple columns are what is in our, was in our superintendent and our Board of Ed budget based on October experience. The first column in purple is the projected 13-14, and then the 14-15. So this is what our budget was built on. If you follow down to the cash balance, we would have $2.4 million this year, and a projected 1.5 next year, which is 1 times the IBNR.
Where do we get that? Oh, okay, there it is, the cash balance as of 6:30, got it, okay.
It's in the
thank you.
red. The next set of numbers is the green columns are the December experience, which brings us down to still a $2 million cash balance this year. It deteriorates down in 14-15 to 890. And then with the latest January projections, the 13-14 column comes down to a cash balance of 1.6, but we're down to a $26,000 cash balance in 14-15 based on those January numbers.
And the IBNR is projected to be 1.605?
Right.
And what numbers, we're going to have the February claims experience before we vote, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Yes.
February.
Yes.
When you vote early April.
Well, we have January.
You have, yes, February, not March. Not March. Thank you. Sorry about that.
You got them today? Come on down. Thank you. Our representatives from Aon are here. Thank you very much.
No, I haven't done anything with them because I got them while I was on the road today, so.
Okay.
that's it.
Do you have any information that you can share with us about the
Sure,
new
I mean,
numbers?
I can tell you that because we do the.
Thank you for coming back, gentlemen.
Yeah, no problem.
They came from Boston.
Yes, thank you.
Because we do it on a rolling 12, February would be inserted into the calculation, and February of 2013 would come out. The claims were virtually the same.
So there's no impact?
So, well, there's a small impact because we're going to trend for one less month. Minor, very minor. And I didn't check the prescription in the dental, so any gain you may have had on the medical, you could theoretically have lost on the prescription or dental, or you know, the other coverages could be to the better as well, so.
So I'm going to be dangerous here. I don't mean to put words in your mouth. But essentially, we shouldn't, based on your preliminary review, we should see no material change to what these projections tell us.
Correct.
For next year.
Right.
Okay. At this point, do you have anything else to say about the schedule right now? Okay. Questions, comments? I want to turn this over to board members, all board members. Mr. Brockfeld.
Thank you. And this, I would argue that this is probably the most complicated thing we do as a board, personally. I know year after year getting our hands around this, and you guys do a really great job trying to make it reasonably understandable. I'm sure for you it is understandable. But the question is to our advisors. If I heard you correctly, we use a 12-month rolling experience to make our projections.
Correct.
Is that what you said? So it seems to me, I mean, is that I mean, obviously it's done for a reason, so I'm opening the question to you, but it strikes me that much like discussions we have here about, for example, Storm Sandy, right, you know, comes in and wreaks havoc on the town, and, you know, we don't go ahead and adjust our entire budgets because we expect another 100-year storm to come, you know, the next year. The same question, I guess, sort of goes here. So obviously, and I really apologize, if I say something offline, let me know here.
That's quite all right.
But, so obviously, there's been some deterioration in the experience of the health claims by the Board of Ed employees
Right.
in recent months. Is that a fair statement, but does that mean that necessarily that's projectable forward, or does that just mean that there was a couple of things that happened that threw our numbers out for a month or two?
It means actuarially, because of your size, the best historical period that we can choose for a group your size to project forward is 12 months. If you were much smaller, we might use 24 months.
Okay.
But because of your size, it's pretty standard industry practice that a group this size would use 12 months of experience to project forward.
I think your question might have been on the deterioration of the plan, and is it a one-time thing or not, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, okay.
well, I mean, you don't know that, obviously. I'm just wondering if such a, I mean, it seems like a very rapid deterioration, or I guess that's the wrong word, or a very rapid or sudden increase in claims, I guess is a better way to phrase it, I guess. And so I'm just wondering whether or not it necessarily means that all these numbers are going to project forward and have these what look very poor outcomes for us in terms of our reserves.
Well, I would say, looking at this kind of stuff every day,
Right.
that this is not as rapid a deterioration as I see a lot of times. You deteriorate about a percentage point a month.
Can I, just to add to that, because I was wondering the same thing, if you go to the schedule and you look at the claims accrual, right, the so-called IBNR, right, those are those kind of actual average numbers on a monthly basis?
What
No.
number?
What, the claims accrual, the IBNR, right? You're calling it the, I guess that's what this is, the 1.9, the 1.7, the 1.3. It's labeled claims accrual for medical, RX, and dental,
Yeah, that-
IBNR.
Yeah, that would be about the IBNR.
Right, so that'd be about the average per month. So if you look at it, it was as high as 1.9 back in 9/10, then 1.7, 1.3, 1.4, 1.4, 1.4, 1.5, 1.4, 1.5, 1.5, 1.6. So you can't really say that that's a, I mean, if I'm reading this correctly, that doesn't imply a rapid deterioration. right?
Exactly.
It actually applies a level of somewhat consistency, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think from a historical perspective, the board's claim experience was really unique for quite some time in that we didn't see any trend at all of the claims. I mean, the board's claims were flat. I think it was 9, 10, and 11. Fiscal years 9, 10, 10, 11, and 11, 12. Completely flat. In fact, even some negative trend in terms of paid claims during those 3 years. So, you know, I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I've never seen anybody go 3 years and not have some trending of claims.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, so I guess, in a way, that goes to my question, I think.
Right.
Which is that, and again, I apologize, I know I'm a layman in this area, I really do. But, so, okay, so we had 3 years where we had this wonderful, so-called wonderful experience, right?
Right.
And so we took that wonderful experience, which you're saying struck, at least in hindsight, is an anomaly from your experience,
Very
but we
much so.
used that information to make projections. So, you know what this really comes back to, ironically, is the question I think I asked you last year and the year before,
Yeah.
which is, I still don't understand, as someone who has some understanding of statistics, you know, college-level statistics, how a group of our size is big enough to make these projections. In other words, I still don't understand why we don't use some national cohort size thing of similar age and so forth that we have to make our projections. I don't understand why you have a couple hundred employees and a few things happen to a few of them, and all of a sudden we keep changing our projections.
Well, I mean-
in either direction, good or bad.
Right. I mean, keep in mind that we are trying to project the utilization patterns and the demographics of your group. You certainly could take the account and move it into some community-rated based plan where they're taking your information with 600,000 other members and saying, okay, it's going to be an X% increase on the information on the entire group. Well, we can tell you what the increase is going to be in that scenario. It's going to be whatever trend is every single year.
What's trend?
now.
Yeah.
I mean, I just got new trend guidance as well. It's 8.6 on medical now.
8.6% increase year over year.
Right, year over year. That's what we're using going forward.
And we're using what?
On which piece?
The Board of Ed?
On the Board of Ed, we're using 7.5.
Right, 7.
And on the town side?
The town is 9. Well, the town, before we got the new guidance, our trend rates were 9. So we used 9 on the town, and now, with the next update, I will use 8.6, because that's the prospective trend going forward.
I don't know whether Mr. Brockfeld...
Yeah, I still, come on.
No, go.
So what is it I'm reading?
I'd love to be able to answer your question with the perfect answer.
No, I know.
But you know I don't have that.
No, I mean, by definition, these are all estimates. I understand that.
If I may interrupt a little bit.
Yeah.
There have been an incredible amount of actuarial modeling done that has determined statistically the group size that is appropriate to be underwritten upon its own experience versus the group size that should be 100% community rated. Community rated is age, sex, and health status, to get, if you want to go all the way. The Medicare Advantage plans do that. You know, and so basically we are at that size that has been determined by every major medical insurance company that we should stand on our own, that you're going to get the best, most likely answer by standing on your own.
It's the best way to estimate the risk of this population is to use 12 months and project forward. To Bob's point, approximately 450 lives, 450 medical lives is deemed 100% credible. So that's the point at which you start using your own experience and just your own experience to project claims forward. If you were smaller than 450, we'd either have to use a longer experience period, or we'd have to use a blending of your experience with, I think to your point, what we call a manual rate or manual claims, which are, they would take your demographics, an actuary would take your demographics and say, this is what the claims should be.
Right.
For your demographic, with this plan, the claims are X. So we might weight your own experience 60% and the manual rate or the manual claims 40%. The blending of that comes up with whatever the projection is.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm mixing and matching in my mind, which I shouldn't because I know they're completely unrelated, is in the financial world, right, the biggest mistake any investor makes is having any interest whatsoever in how a fund, for example, did in years past, because the statistical evidence is 100% conclusive that it has absolutely zero bearing on how it'll do in the future. But common sense tells you, well, if it did well in the past, you know, it's probably going to do well in the future. So I'm mixing and matching in my own mind, because that's the world I come from. But I'm just having a hard time wrapping my hands around the fact that a group of 450 people, just because, I'm simplifying it here, but just because a few people get the flu that got it this year, didn't get it last year, means all of a sudden that changes the projections going forward. Because we're dealing, not only are we dealing with a small group size, but we're dealing with a relatively small time period. That's what and I guess at the end of the day, all this really comes down to tell you the truth, is how much we reserve, right?
Well,
Yeah, you know.
first of all, it's not a real small group for the Board of Ed side.
Well, I mean,
how many people?
450 seems...
14?
1,400.
1,400 employees, and each of those employees
Have families.
have
Right.
families
So
and
it's-
dependents.
right.
So
30-something hundred.
3,700.
So it's almost 4,000
Yeah. you're
people.
talking-
Okay, I mean,
But credibility, well, you can do credibility either way on subscribers or membership, but I'm talking about...
Let me ask-
Okay, but here's
subscribers.
a way to get to, here's a thought on that. So the last actual numbers we have here, right? So for example, if I pulled out what our actual numbers were last year on claims, how close were the projections that you did the year before that using the 12-month period? How close were you?
As of today, we're off by 1 percentage point on the 13-14 projection.
Right, so you're off 1 percentage point, which in numbers, a couple $100,000?
270.
Yeah, 200 and some odd.
So you're off 1%, so, which would tell you that your methodology
Is pretty good.
is pretty good, because you get a 1% assurance you're up.
Right.
Which, to what you were saying is, what that goes to is what's not good is our actual reserve level.
Right. But let me finish with this last thought. Is it fair to say that even if I agree, and I do respect your knowledge, I think we've heard this year after year, so I do respect it. Let's just say that it is accurate that the best practices say this size group means, but isn't it fair to say that we would reduce the volatility of our reserves and our concerns about our reserves if we use the national cohort or whatever it is, rather than allowing ourselves to be bounced around by the particular experience we're having within our group?
Yes.
Yes, and wouldn't that necessarily, I mean, wouldn't
But
some
you'd
people...
also reduce the accuracy.
Well,
Yes.
but the money doesn't get flushed down the toilet if we don't spend it. I mean, these are reserves. I mean,
They're the
if we end up
reserves
reserving a
with
little
the- With the
extra...
best information that we have available, based upon thousands of hours and statistical
But-
analysis performed by dozens of health
But-
insurance companies,
Yeah, okay.
to come to the best potential answer at any given time for any given population.
I mean, if you asked me or any consultant worth their salt, they would never have you blend any kind of manual rates in on a group this size.
Because it would involve us putting aside more money than we need to, or because something bad would...
It wouldn't represent your true risk.
So either way, if the community rate was lower than your claims experience, then you would underfund.
Well, yeah.
If it's higher, then you would overfund. What some accounts do, and we wouldn't recommend it for an account your size, is they'll put a claim fluctuation margin that can range anywhere from 2 to 5%. And folks like me and Carlton, when it's a fully insured group, we argue like heck to get that out of the fully insured basis, because it can tend to overprice the premium. So,
You mean self-insured?
If you were a fully insured account, the insurance carrier would
Right.
have
Right.
claim fluctuation margin built into the rates. So you'd pay a rate in excess of what they actually thought your true liability was. In the event of poor claim experience, they'd have money there to cover it.
But in that case, you're 100% correct, because we'd be paying them that extra money, and it would be their money to keep if they didn't need to spend it on our claims.
Correct.
In our case, if we chose to do that, we'd be, quote, paying ourselves that extra money in form of extra reserves. Is that correct? So it's not like, I guess I'm just raising the question as to whether or not, I guess the bottom line is we need better reserves.
Right.
Right, yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, their methodology
Fine.
was within 1% of
Right.
actual. The last
Right.
year, we have full debt
Right,
on.
right.
but if you did want to fund an extra reserve, you could put in a claim fluctuation margin. We don't generally see it on an account this size.
You'd be the first one to
Yeah.
do it, but...
Right.
But that would be an
Well,
ultra-conservative
it's gonna be first
approach,
something.
and that's something that you could do.
Okay.
You all set?
No, yeah, and I appreciate the indulgence, because it
sure.
is hard to understand this totally.
Mr. Walsh?
Doreen, in the Board of Ed's fiscal year 14 budget, how much did you plan on using of the reserve?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Did you not budget in that you were going to use some of the reserve amounts? Or were you, that your revenues were going to be less than your expenditures?
In this budget column, the final
Well,
budget column for 13?
This current year 14, yeah. Were you planning on using any of it, the reserve?
We don't touch the reserve. We budget accordingly based on Aon projections, and whatever the budget ends up being is paid into the medical retention fund. We don't do anything with the fund balance itself. The claims come out of it. We budget and pay into it the amount that's budgeted.
No, I
for
think
health
last year, I think you guys actually had decided to use some of the balance, your IBNR, the reserve balance that you had left. So for example, look at your schedule, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reserve balance that you had left on the actual 2012-2013 was 2.560.
Yep.
Okay? The reserve balance you had on your final budget 2013-14 was 1891, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know the 2.560 .560 was not an exact number as at the time we approved that budget, but we knew that it was pretty close to that, and we knew that you were going to use up some of your reserve last year with the budget that was passed, as I recall. This was a conversation that Mr. Mayor and I had about a week ago, correct?
Correct.
Do you remember what that amount was?
Yeah, it was like $650,000 or something.
Right. Does anybody else recall that?
I mean, if you look at the final budget, the balance on July 1 is 2528. The balance projected at 6/30 is 1891.
Right.
That's a budget number. So the difference there is what was anticipated to be used in excess of the revenue into the fund.
Which is like 630,000. The number's not that right. 2528 minus 1891, right?
Well, we budget to the IBNR. But the final budget for 13-14, that we left almost $500,000 in there because we had gone out to bid and changed carriers, and we didn't take everything we could have out of the reserve. We were a little reluctant to, because we weren't sure exactly what was going to go on with the transition. The rates weren't set yet. So that, in the final budget of 13-14, we left $500,000 in there.
Correct. You were scheduled to be about $400,000 or $500,000 excess reserve at the end. That's a correct statement.
Right. They were going to use less.
Right. They were not going to use all of the excess reserve.
Right. But they were still going to use...
Some of the excess reserve.
Correct. That's as I recall. Ken Shea.
I mean, if you look at,
I think so.
I mean, if you look at the numbers going back to 29 and 210, at one point, the excess reserve was 3270. So, and that part of that reserve has been intentionally used every year.
And that's what I thought was going on, so I'm surprised to hear that you don't know that. Do you not think that you guys were trying to use some of your high reserve over the last couple of years?
Well, I thought the agreement was that we would budget at 1 times the IBNR.
Which means that by definition, you were using some of the reserve because you were over that 1 times the IBNR. That's all we're saying.
Okay.
What you're saying is absolutely correct, that you were quote-unquote allowed to get down to the 1 times IBNR. But in order to do that, you were forecast to utilizing any reserve balance over that 1 times IBNR during the year.
Correct. But when you say we used it for something else, that's inaccurate.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
No, that was not said.
No.
Okay.
No. No one said that. That I heard. No one said
I
that.
thought that's what Jim said.
Well,
Okay.
you were budgeting to the IBNR, so you were using the reserve to get down to that number.
Right.
In essence, having a higher reserve, but almost forcing the reserve down lower. Correct?
Correct. That's how I thought we
Okay.
had agreed we would budget.
Okay, so that's where we were. Now
Okay.
turning to Aon, and you guys are fine with the one-time IBNR, correct? That's your decision?
No.
As our paid experts, that's what you're happy with that amount? One times IBNR as our reserve?
We have an actuarial staff that does nothing but IBNR calculations. And every June 30th of every year, we provide both the board and the town what we think the estimate should be on June 30th of that given year, the IBNR. And yes, to answer your question, it's 1 times.
It's 1 times
Yes.
IBNR.
It's the number that we think is the liability going forward if the plan were to terminate on that day.
Okay. Because we're driving to that number, correct? I mean, you know that the Board of Ed is basically, we had a higher amount, and they're, in a way, utilizing that to basically force the 1 times IBNR, even though we had higher reserves.
Bless you.
So in essence, they're trying to use some of their past positive balance.
I see that is what's happening, yeah.
I don't think that's
And-
something they're not involved in that. They give us numbers We make the decision what to budget.
Okay. But seeing that, now that you've seen it, is that a good practice?
Really, it's not for me to decide whether that's a good practice or not. I mean, the two numbers that we provide
Yep.
are, here's what we think your budget is
Yep.
going forward, and here's what we think you need to have in reserve every June 30th to fund any liability that would occur if you were to terminate on any particular day.
Okay. Let me ask you about another number that you give. Trend rate.
Yeah.
You're telling us now that it's going down to 8.6 for the town, and that you'll budget for that appropriately
Yeah,
the
our
next time
national
you do it.
trend
The national
survey
trend's 8.6.
just came down almost half a percentage point.
Okay. When Dr. Title was before us the other night, he explained, upon questioning from myself, he said that and I thought you had alluded to it during your conversation at the first budget meeting that we had, that the trend rate I thought it was 9.5 for the town. You're telling me now it's 9 currently?
It's currently 9.
9, and the Board of Ed uses 7.5.
No, it's currently 9.
What was it for this year? Doesn't matter. The 14 year was 9.2?
9.
9.
Okay. And the Board of Ed's not 7.5.
Correct.
And upon questioning Dr. Title about where that number came from, he said that was a number that Aon forced upon them, basically, that was your number. And I guess the question I have is, what was the basis for your actuaries basically treating them as two separate groups, as opposed to we're one town and want to have one internal service fund? Why weren't we all at 9? Because...
Well, okay, I think I can answer it.
Okay.
You know, if you look at that 3-year period where I told you that claims were pretty flat,
Yeah?
we had been projecting 9 or whatever the current trend rate was at the time for 3 straight years, and I think that's why you see that fund balance went up so high, was because it was surplus after surplus after surplus.
Yeah.
So, and I don't remember because it's quite some time ago, and I just can't remember that far back, but there was a conversation about using a trend rate that would have been lower than our current actuarially provided trend. And our philosophy on that is, if you want to use a lower trend, that's okay, as long as there's money in a reserve somewhere, in this case, the IBNR reserve, at more than 1 times, that makes up the difference between the 7.5% and 9%.
Okay. And that seems to be where we have the problem now, because 2 things were happening. We were, basically, the BOE was able to bite the apple twice. They were able to take advantage of a lower trend rate of 7.5, and, I guess you didn't know this until you saw this data, they were able to basically work towards a one-time IBNR number to use their positive reserve. So in actuality, you're giving them the benefit of having that higher IBNR, having that higher reserve number, and giving them a lower trend. But yet, they're having the ability to basically reduce their medical fees twice. Once, by the trend rate being reduced, right? Because if their trend rate had been what the town's was, their medical expense number that you would have had would have been higher, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you have that, they're having that ability. And secondly, they have the ability, because now they're aiming at 1 times IBNR and spending that reserve down over the last number of years.
Right.
And now we hit the perfect storm where now all of a sudden their numbers are hitting higher, and they're at 1 times IBNR, and we're at a 7.5% rate.
Yep.
And now we're screwed. And now we have this number where we're, by next year, we're almost going to be going negative, or we are going negative. So that's the problem, right?
When we started the 2014 projections, my understanding was that the reserve was at 1.8-ish of where it needed to be.
1.8 IBNR?
Right. It was
Okay.
at 1.8 times
Yep.
where it needed to be. That certainly gave enough cover,
Yep.
in my opinion, to lower that from 9 to 7.5, because to go from 9 to 7.5 was about 350 grand, somewhere in that range.
All right.
So even if we missed and it was at 9,
Sure.
which is what we would have used,
Yep,
that differential, there was that much.
still in there.
Yeah, still
Yep.
in there. So
Yep.
to me, and I actually went back and spoke to the head of actuarial that works for our company, because believe it or not, I'm not given the freedom to just use whatever trend I feel like.
Okay.
We have to use the trend that our actuaries give us.
But that was on the assumption that we were going to maintain the reserve rates and not spend it down.
Correct.
Okay.
Let me, I think that was excellent. Can I provide some context?
Sure.
For that?
I have a lot further questions on it, but go ahead.
Yeah, because I think that was an excellent summary of it. And I want to be careful what I say here, because I don't know that we understood the change in trend percentage at our board, right? I'm just saying, and I don't want to say we didn't. I don't remember that discussion about the change in trend percentage from 9 to 7.5. The first question I would have is, should we be going back to the 8.6 in our March assumptions, which would therefore make this number even worse?
I would say that you probably should.
Okay, that's number one. I'd like to know the impact of that. I think we all would, okay, because this number, and we'd like to know that sooner rather than later, even if we have to do it on the
And
February.
quite frankly, now, the impact is not as big, because now it's not 7.5 to 9, it's 7.5 to 8.6.
Right, so it's
So
1
that
percentage.
300 difference, it comes down even more.
Right, so we would love to see that, even if it was on the January numbers at this point, knowing that that's the bigger delta between, because the experience, you just told us, isn't going to be a material difference, so the difference is going to be that trend number. So it'd be great to have that number, if you wouldn't mind. To provide some context, a number of years ago, we had found, as a board collectively, that the town had been underfunding their medical costs for a period of years, and using the overfunding of the Board of Education side to compensate for that underfunding on the town side.
I believe that to be the case, yep.
It absolutely was the case. In fact, I think the town was actually in a negative IB&R position. But when you looked at it, we were okay on that part of the internal service fund because the Board of Ed was so far in the black over what they needed to fund, right? And that's represented, you can see that represented here by their cash balance. In 2010, they were at 5.2 million. The IB&R was 1.9, right? So they were at over 2.5 times the IB&R, where the town was actually negative. And that's kind of when the whole thing blew up, right? Where we basically said, we've got a problem with the internal service fund, but this problem was caused by two things. Number one, on the risk management side, related to workers' comp, right? And number two, the fact that the town wasn't living up to its side of the bargain in terms of putting enough towards the medical. So our board was complicit in doing several things to correct the problem. Number one, we all agreed that we wanted to appropriately fund workers' comp. Number two, we asked that there be programs put in place by the administrations at the time to deal with how do we lower workers' comp issues, correct? Number two, we insisted that the town start adequately funding their IB&R and bringing their IB&R numbers up, which you can see has happened, right, on the town side. That IB&R number has increased. And number three, out of fairness to the Board of Education, who had been carrying the water for quite some time, we actually said, as we bring up the town side, you can bring down to a reasonable level your IB&R on the Board of Ed side. And we actually went before the Board of Education and spoke about this issue, how it's the same sandbox, how we need to work together, and how we need to work collaboratively on that. Now, that being said, again, I come back to the trend number. I don't know what we knew and when we knew it about that, and I think that is a problem. But I will also point to, if we look at the balance as of this year, which is the only year that's quote-unquote set in stone from a funding perspective, right? Not from the claims could jumble around based on what happens the next few months. But they're still projected right now, 2014, even if we go with worst-case scenario, right? They're projected to be at 1.6 million on the cash balance, if I read this schedule correctly.
That's current case scenario.
Current case scenario, right? And their IBNR at the end of this year is 1.5 million. So they're still, quote-unquote, as of the June 30th of 2014, they're still in compliance with that 1 times IBNR. Now, 2 things, and I'm sorry for the soliloquy here, I'm just trying to put it in context. That doesn't solve the trending issue that you're talking about, which says, hey, if we knew you were going for the 1 times, we wouldn't be using 7.5, we would at this point be using 8.6, so that's a problem, right? And number 2, best available information says that the experience level has been so bad recently that we use up the entire IBNR, and we have to fix it now so that we stay at 1 times IBNR for next fiscal year with the Board of Education, right?
Yeah, that's reasonable.
This budget we're talking about this year,
Right.
right now, because that number goes to $26,000.
Because exactly, and that number's not set in stone right now
Right.
because we haven't voted on it.
Right.
I mean, I just want to make sure that we keep it all in context, because
Yeah.
this has been
That's a good
a
point.
5-year odyssey that we've been on with this fund relative to how we fund it. So that's all, and then I'll turn it right back over to questions or comments. I'm going to go to Mr. Walsh because he allowed me that, but he still has a lot of questions.
Well, the question is, when did it first go to 7.5? And was that your actuary's decision, or is it something someone in our administration requested?
It was 9 for the 9-10, 10-11, and 11-12 year, or thereabouts 9. I don't know exactly what the number was. And then I believe 12-13 was the first time we reduced it to 7.5 after those 3 years of flat or no trend. We reduced it to 7.5 because there was, at that time, I believe, in excess of 2 times the IBNR, or exactly 2 times the IBNR. And that year didn't pan out well at all.
Yeah.
So that brought that down. The year after, the 13-14, we went back to 9.2.
So where are we now?
I thought you said we were at 7.5.
Yeah.
No. 13-14 was 9.2. The projection for 14-15 is 7.5.
So you raised it up last year and then you lowered it now?
We raised it up last year because our understanding was there wasn't 2 times or in excess of the IBNR to make up for the reduction.
So you just recently made this change to 7.5 for this coming budget year?
Correct.
On your own, your actuaries just chose that number?
With the assumption that we had 1.86 times the IBNR, which certainly would have been enough money to warrant the reduction to 7.5.
Okay.
So, to me, it's just, is it in this bucket or is it in this bucket? If you have the money, you have the money. I mean, it's either part of the
But to
fiscal
us, it's
budget
an
number.
expense thing.
It's either a fiscal budget number and then you have X in the IBNR, or you do it the other way around, but the totals still, to me, is the same.
Okay. So based on the current projections where they stand, including the numbers that you just read today, would your actuaries, if they knew where this is projecting to go, recommend a different trend rate?
Sure. If I go back now and say we're going to update it one more time with February data, the excess IBNR that we're going to use to cover the difference between the 7.5 and the 9 is gone, then I'm not using 7.5 because they wouldn't allow me to.
Okay.
Jim, can I say one?
Sure.
Just one. Everything makes sense. The only thing I'm just a little curious about is that even back to the December. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay. Even back to the December projection, they were already dramatically lower than the IBNR in their cash balance, right? 887 versus 1,574
Projected for next year.
for next year.
Right.
Yeah. So why are we only waiting till now to talk about whether or not the 7.5 is appropriate versus the 8.6? I mean, it's only gotten worse with the January numbers. You know, the projection now for next year looks even worse. But even back in December, which now is a couple months ago, 4 months ago, whatever, 3 months ago, well, you don't get the numbers right away, but regardless, it was half of the IBNR. So I guess I'm a little...
I mean, from my standpoint,
Yeah.
if the IBNR number was 1.86 times what it needed to be, that would have been a reserve of $2.4-ish million.
Right.
Even the last 3 months of negative claim experience would not have eaten away from 2.5 to the number that you'd need to get to be able to use 7.5. It basically was that simple for me.
I'm sorry, say, the actual claims experience wouldn't have brought it below 1-to-1, you're saying, in terms of actual dollars?
It wouldn't have brought it below a safe margin between 7.5% and 9%.
So when you're looking at whether or not to use 7.5 versus 8.6, are you looking at the current budget year or the projected, or the next budget year?
Well, I mean, maybe you can help me out with the 650 grand.
Doesn't matter.
Because if you take the $2.4 million that I thought was the IBNR number, and you knock it down by $600,000, and then you start eating into it because of poor claim experience, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So the $600,000, the first time I heard anything about $600,000 was last Tuesday night. And I still don't really comprehend what happened there. Quite
Well,
frankly.
shouldn't that be something, Carlton, that we should be talking to you about? This town should be talking to you about? When because you're basing, and your actuaries are basing calculations on maybe inaccurate information that either we haven't provided you and you guys are assuming is there, because you have no idea that the $650,000 that we might be utilizing towards that. So it would make sense that we
makes a
would
difference.
kind of almost fill you in frequently about that number.
It makes a difference. Yeah, I mean, so,
Jim, go ahead. Oh, please.
The cash balance at the end of on June 30, 2013, was almost 2.6 million.
Right.
That's what we started.
Yeah.
When we budgeted, the budget number is 2.5. We're very close.
Yep.
I still don't see where,
Look at the cash balance at the end of the year.
right, but that's,
That's using $600,000 of the cushion. That's what he's talking about.
Yep. Question.
Mr. Kiley.
I think I have this right. I'm trying to simplify and kind of come full circle. If I were to say to you, using the best available information, which is this January data, knowing that February is coming, but put that aside because we could redo this exercise in 3 weeks or whenever that case is. If there was a directive that the town was committed to having 1 times the IBNR available at the end of next year with the latest and greatest data, could you then go back and recalculate what the trend rate would need to be in order to achieve that number, and then from there simply turn that into how much of an increase that the town is looking at on a dollar contributed basis to get back to that 1X number?
do you
Go ahead.
want to add something to that?
Well, I think I did a...
Does the question make sense?
Yeah,
To me, it does.
I think I did a calculation of it.
Yeah, I mean, mathematically, it could do it, yeah.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I did a brief calculation here, and I said, right now, it looks like we're, if you look at this, we're 1,484,000 in the hole.
Mhm.
If you change 1%, and again, this is cocktail napkin math,
Mhm.
on annual claims of 28 million and change,
1.8?
it comes to about a $500,000 delta.
Okay.
So basically, if you're looking at the 2014, 2015 budget,
Mhm.
setting aside anything else like
Yeah.
changes on the town side,
Right,
you get a $2 million hit.
okay.
That's my number, is that this budget is short. Now, I'd like that verified.
Right, that's the brief analysis I would like to see. You know,
Yeah.
if we are committed to 1X,
Right.
and these are the best assumptions we have, I don't care what the trend rate is, we can back into that. It's going to be the result of these other actions and these assumptions, right? Whether it
Right.
ends up being at 8.8 or 9.8, that I don't know, but it would be good to know what that calculates out to. But more importantly, what is the dollar number that we need to consider using those assumptions to get this budget back to the 1 times the IBNR with all the data we have? That's my
Yeah, I
gating
wouldn't-
question.
I don't think I would calculate it using a backed-into trend number. I'd probably give you the regular trend, the
Right, and
trend
calculate
number,
the
and then
IBNR,
say,
see
what's
what
the
the number
additional
comes out.
dollar amount that you have to add from wherever you're going to get it from?
And that's what I did.
That's fine.
I used the 1.1% differential between the 7.5 and the 8.6 that you quoted.
Right.
I did it on an annual claims, and I don't know that, again, cocktail napkin math, and I came out to an increase of 500 and some odd thousand. You add that to the 1.48 that we're short, and that's how I came up with $2 million.
Right.
Now,
To me, that's the question, and then are we committed to that, and what do we do about it?
Now, on the flip side,
Wait,
go ahead, go ahead.
500,000 is 2% of 28 million.
It's, yeah, I did a calculation, yeah, it's 500 and something is what I came to. I mean, we can
But,
argue
yeah,
about it,
I
but
mean,
it's like
but
2%.
it's probably going to be more like 300 and something, but that doesn't.
Whatever,
yeah,
it comes
it's-
out to
it's
about
okay.
1 point. But here's the deal, on the town side, we're over on the IBNR substantially right now. So we do have an offset on the town side.
So do you want me to do that calculation just on
Yes.
the board piece?
No, do it on everything.
Do you have one of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, what Eric and Carlson are going to do when they get to the office tomorrow morning, assuming they ever get there.
We're just going to go right there.
We have cots in the back, we don't even want you to leave.
Yeah, they're going to take the new data, they're going to plug in the 8.6, and they're going to come up with a new number, and they're going to trend the current estimate of the IBNR, using that same 8.6%, and then from that, we will be able to determine what the difference is, and that difference will be what would be needed to fund to fund the Board of Ed, for the Board of Ed to be whole. And now, the reason for the Board of Ed to be whole, I guess, would be for them to be whole. The deterioration that we're talking about is, on a global basis, a total town basis, becomes an issue with respect to the internal service fund deficit that shows up in the CAFR that everyone sees, the rating agency sees. There's two comments there. One, what really exists inside the Board of Ed really isn't relatively important at all to the rating agencies or on the CAFR. The total number is what's important. Secondly, though, the new rating agency strategies take into account more the entire debt liability activity of a town, as opposed to isolating internal service fund versus pension fund versus OPEB. So from that perspective, the town of Fairfield benefits dramatically because we are so well-funded on our pension side. So they won't be looking, so the internal service fund will be less weighted. So the board could make the decision to make a one-time jump to the budget of the 1.5 plus or minus million, or you could say, let's phase it in over 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. So those, that's kind of like an overview of putting you know, the number tied to the rating agencies, tied to the cap rate contracts.
Thank you. The one thing that does, though, is, I mean, when I look at it in an overall, on the internal service fund, which has been our focus for the last couple of years, we're going from a negative of 2.6 at the end of this year to a negative of 4.
1.1, right, 1.5 million.
Right, which is the 1.5 we're talking about,
Right.
which doesn't factor in, you know, $400,000, let's say,
Yeah.
of calculated loss. So we're to the bad, however you slice it and dice
Right.
it, we're to the bad 1.5 to $2 million, period.
Exactly.
And the problem I see is that the Board of Ed's medical number is so much larger than the town, so that when we do have an impact, and it impacts the Board of Ed side, it's just a lot more dramatic a number.
Right.
And I don't know if there's anybody at this table who can tell me why, in the future, we should have a different trend number from one to the other. Because I don't see a reason why. Because we're not even big enough to be the 450,000 to be 100%, you know, what you had talked about before, a group size. But I look at this as a town situation. So yes, you could have, and we did, 3 great years for the Board of Ed, flat, right? But we knew that wasn't going to continue at some point, because you even admitted that it was an odd thing. It was like, it was, you know, it stood out almost. So at some point, it was not going to be that way. And just like, if we look at the town could be over for a while, and then, you know, so I think we've got to balance it off, and I think the only way to balance it off is to use the same trend rate for both, always. And if it's going to be anything different, I think it's got to be like almost highlighted for this board and during the budget process to know that some major component of that calculation is changed.
Any other questions on this from board members? I mean, now we understand it, we understand the scope of the issue. Now the question is, as we go through this, how do we deal with it?
Can I just clarify something?
Please.
I just want to make sure it's clear that when the actuary set the trend at 7.5%, it was based on the 2.6 million fund balance, or cash balance, and they knew that we were budgeting at 1 times IBNR. They knew that, right? 1 times IBNR. They knew it was, my understanding was that the 7.5% based on our fund balance and the fact that we were budgeting at 1 times the IBNR.
Yeah, I don't think, Doreen, from our perspective, it doesn't matter to us really what you're going to budget the IBNR at. The only thing we care about when we're going to...
The reserve.
Yeah.
The reserve.
The only thing that we care about is when we're going to adjust, if we're going to adjust that trend, is to make sure that there is excess dollars to make up for the difference between the trend that's published and the number that we're agreeing to use going forward. Do you have that? Is that going to be set aside somewhere in the event that that you terminated and had to pay those claims as run-out claims? There's a reserve set up in excess of what the true IBNR is deemed to be.
It sounds like you guys didn't understand what you were saying to each other. Just hearing it, because what I heard her say is, we're going to budget so that we're at 1 times IBNR at the end of the year. And I heard you say, hey, that doesn't matter, right? We're not looking at that. But 10 minutes ago, when we talked about the trend line, you said, oh, actually, the reserve balance actually matters a lot, because if I know you're at 1.8 times IBNR, I have the comfort to go to 7. And I'm not playing, Ken, you got this. I don't think you guys are understanding each other.
I guess I would caution then in the word reserve, and I quite frankly find this an odd way to do this,
Okay.
in my opinion, but...
Explain that.
Other clients that I work with, for instance, would have, you know, here's the gross budget number. You take away from that employee contributions, other sources of revenue and income and so forth. You have a budget, and you have a separate reserve set up, an IBNR reserve. And every year, we say, here's what you need to increase your reserve by, and that reserve number gets adjusted mostly up because claims don't trend backwards. And there's money deposited to that fund to maintain, and when your auditors come in, there's money in this fund to cover run-out claims, versus the adjustment up or down of a budget to, I mean, ultimately, it's the same thing.
That's what I was going to say, I don't see any difference.
The dollar's the same, it's the mechanics of how you do it.
In the
So-
interest of time, I'm going to interject a little bit. And I've had conversations with Carlton, I've conversations with Stu Ribeiro, who was involved in the discussions with the town, and basically to try to close this gap between Doreen and Carlton. And correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Doreen has been focused on trending towards one times.
Right.
That's a true statement. The Board of Ed initiated, as I understand it, a conversation with Aon at some point a few years ago that said, hey, since we're doing so well, can we do lower? So there was discussion, they went lower, then they went higher, and then there was communication between the Board of Ed and Aon this last winter where Aon believed and understood the IBNR to be at 1.8 times.
Okay.
They did not understand that part of that was being used.
Okay.
So they went ahead with the 7.5. So there was never a communication between Aon and the Board of Ed that they're basing things on 2 times plus or minus times IBNR, and the Board of Ed was actually, who were there at one point, or were trending down.
Right.
Is that, did I say anything that was incorrect?
No, I don't think so.
Right, and I think that's what I heard here
Yeah.
in the exchange. Is that there was a misunderstanding over what was being utilized, what you guys were doing, what you meant when you said, hey, we were budgeting to 1 times IBNR. You meant you're utilizing the reserve, so you'll be down at 1 times IBNR eventually. That's the goal. You guys didn't understand that because the way, whatever, the way it was communicated, whatever. Again, I'm not playing gotcha, I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
it wasn't crisp.
In your example where you said, simple way to do it, just take a number and take the, the revenue off of it, you missed one revenue line. If they had added a revenue line that said, I'm taking that much revenue off, then you'd had a lower number, you would have budgeted, you would have projected off that number, basically.
Does anybody have any more questions on this item?
I just request that somehow, Bob, you monitor this thing with the Board of Ed and Aon to figure out a way that you can get these gentlemen accurate information that they're relying on, whether, so that everyone's speaking the same language, that they know what's the projected reserve, I guess, is going to be at the end of the year, not what it is on the day that you're doing the calculation, I guess.
Yes, sir.
Great. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming back. I know it's been a long day for you. I know you were traveling. I know we gave you late notice, and we greatly appreciate it.
No problem.
And thank you. Thank you for all your
See
hard
you
work on our
Thursday.
behalf. Doreen, thank you as well for being here tonight.
And we'll let you know Wednesday.
And coming up to the proverbial hot seats as well, so we appreciate it. All right, moving on. We're going to go to Department number 3030, which is purchasing. Oh, actually, should we look at human resources? Sorry, the IBNR discussion was within human resources, so let's do Mary Carol Marlise's budget.
I think we take a quick break.
Yeah, yes, we can after that. For a couple minutes.
Come on up, Mary.
Come on up.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Thank you. Do you have any thing you want to point out to us?
You mean you can't find it by yourself?
Yeah, there you go.
There's always something.
Oh, no, no, I figured it was already circled. The thing that I would like to address this evening
Workers' comp.
is workers' comp. Workers' comp is good.
Right, exactly. But
Workers'
go ahead.
comp is running a little less than it has, which it's 40,000 or so flat. But that's really quite a different trend when you consider that those numbers take in medical trend, and you've talked about it a lot this evening, medical trend of 9% should be reflected in those numbers, and it's not salary increases, because when people are out on workers' comp claims, they get paid. So those salaries, so this is really negative trending for us. And in 2006 or 6, when I came in, the following year, we put in a loss prevention program for the first time, but only $10,000. And in 2010, we doubled that number, and I think we're beginning to see the benefits of those programs.
Okay.
But the number I thought you were going to ask me about was the insurance and claims. That property insurance is projected to go up at 30%. 4 years ago, the town successfully concluded an agreement with KERMA to have a zero rate stabilization program for the next 3 years. So what that means is that our rate did not go up for 3 years, although as property values, as we did schools or built buildings, our property amounts went up. But basically, if you look at the lines of insurance, they changed to reflect current trends, where liability was higher, or property was higher, but the bottom dollar amount, the total amount remained the same. So we have those 3 years of zero increases. Then you have international incidences that would affect reinsurers to a certain extent. The tsunami in the Philippines, the earthquake, the tornadoes, and that's a factor. Recently, reinsurance for that has come down a little bit, but we didn't get the uptick in the 2 previous years. The third thing is the regional disasters that have affected coastal communities, but particularly the Northeast, in Irene, Sandy, Alfred, Hugo. There have been issues with other municipalities in the state that have had department, maybe police issues or whatever, so those would all factor in. And then finally, we have our own experience, which would include a roof at Ludlow, Penfield Pavilion, a death at Lake Mohegan. So we have a number of things that each have a little component in that. That was the worst case scenario. KERMA quoted me on last December. We will be talking to them in the next several weeks. I believe I will have a better quote before your vote, but I don't have it at this moment. But that's other than that, I think the budget is pretty consistent in most places, but that's the big issue in my budget. I am just so grateful it's not workers' comp.
Can I ask one question? Sure, please. Mary, I'm just on what you were just describing, everything you said is understandable, except explain just briefly, you said we had a 3-year freeze on our...
It's called a rate stabilization program, and we had incredibly good experience. We went out to bid, we went out to the market, and KERMA, in order to finalize the agreement with us, offered us this program. It was very funny. They had offered us the program, and as we were about to sign it, they were hesitant about confirming it, but they did continue it, and we got it. And that meant that the rates applied, there were no increases in the rates for 3 full years. And that was a wonderful thing for 3 full years, but the problem is there's a little catch-up involved.
So I guess the only question I have, the only thing I'm thinking is, there's no free lunch, right? So
Well, there is a free lunch because you didn't pay those increases over those years, and if you add the increases over each year, you would have those increases plus whatever we have now. And it's been a very difficult
No, I understand,
time.
but I'm just trying to get back to that. I don't run an insurance company, right? But I mean, they're not in it for charity. So in my mind, all we did was we said to them, we'd like to have our rates even over 3 years. So they took what they would have projected our increases would have been in years 2 and 3
folded them into one big number and divided by 3. I mean, why
No,
would,
that-
why would
that
they?
didn't ha-
what-
we had great experience, that's not what happened. And what I'm trying to say is, when you look at coastal communities obtaining insurance today, when you look at the experience that the Northeast has had in the last several years, whether it's Sandy hitting the Jersey Shore or Hugo taking parts of Vermont out, there have been enormous changes.
No, that much goes without
But
saying.
that's impacting this far more than
Okay.
them giving us a flat rate for 3 years. Because what happened when they gave us the rate stabilization, we did not have an increase that first year, nor the second year, nor the third year.
Well, we wouldn't, because that's what the deal we made.
Yeah, but, so
Right.
there was no, they didn't take an increase the first year and divide it out by
No,
the 3 years.
What he's saying, Mary, is they built it into the quote for the 3-year stabilization and spread it across the 3
But
years.
it hadn't been, it didn't get increased that first year.
No, I understand, but
Yeah.
when you sign the 3-year contract, they basically said, hey, the first year it would have been 250, the second year it'd be 260, the third year it'd be 270, and they turned around and said, let's make it a flat across the 3 years and stabilized it.
They took our if you go back 4 years ago, the rate we paid 4 years ago is the rate that we got for the next 3 years, the next.
Based on the better experience is what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
Got it, better. Thank you.
So there was no increase in the first year.
So they didn't say stable over 3 years, they say stable over 4 years.
But there was a 0 increase for 3. Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Does that help?
Yep.
Mr. DeWitt?
2 questions. First one is interscholastic sports insurance.
Yes,
There's
well,
a healthy increase. What is that exactly?
it's sports insurance for the Board of Ed, for all their programs, all their sports programs that they run for injuries, and there are injuries.
Yep.
And it was a very good rate. It was such a good rate that the company is no longer offering that program, and it wasn't really sufficient for our needs, but you cannot find that insurance at that rate anyplace at this point in time.
Okay. My second question is, we open up our schools for basketball, things like that. Are we, does that insurance policy you just talked about cover children from out of town and other things?
This only covers Board of Ed interscholastic activities.
So what would be considered an event in a Board of Ed building like this one, where a Fairfield basketball team plays a Westport basketball team on a Saturday?
I believe this would be covered, but I would verify that for you.
Just to be clear, you're saying the Fairfield Woods Middle School basketball team is playing the Longlots Middle School basketball team?
We open up our gyms for some amount of payment now to other sports teams,
Yep.
some from out of town. I'm wondering if we have a liability.
They're generally required to have, if you're going to use a facility, you have to sign a liability deal with the Board of Ed. You have to provide proof of insurance.
But
So we have no liability.
You're talking about our school, this is for our school programs only.
I'm saying after school,
Oh, no.
weekends, basketball,
That would-
anything, nothing to do with.
To get the full deals, full explanation of that, it would be probably good to place that question at the Board of Ed. But having been involved in a youth sports program that did use town facilities from time to time, we had to provide an insurance, proof of insurance, and forgive me the technical term, somebody here might know better, but that basically showed that the town was not going to be held liable for anything in the organization provided the coverage.
That's above, yeah. All right, thank you.
And you have to do that before you can rent the space.
Okay.
Going to go to Mr. Walsh.
In regards to that interscholastic sports insurance, is there coverage in there for all of these claims you're hearing in regards to concussions? Because would that cover us? And how would the town be covered if, for example, someone comes back and they're 24 years old and claiming cognitive problems because of football injuries that happened, back when they were in high school?
Rob? Rob O'Connor?
Yep.
People's.
Rob, if you could come up and use one of the mics, please.
You always give me one of those questions where I say, I never need to bring this person, but I'm glad he's here.
Glad he is.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Rob O'Connor. I'm with People's United Insurance, and we're the town insurance consultants for the property casualty. I think if I understand your question, it sounds like that a concussion happens, and then several years later, there's a claim made against the town. That would probably fall under a liability type claim. It wouldn't be covered under a sports accident policy.
Okay. So do we have insurance for those type of claims?
Yes. That would be covered under the general liability for the town.
And the same things where we have a certain self-insured retention, and then we pay a certain amount, and then we have excess coverage above that.
Exactly.
Okay. Because
Yeah.
every level of sports is looking at these concussion injuries right now. I mean, colleges, it's one of the main focuses. I know people have 3 different boards of trustees who that have football programs. I know Tom's been involved in it a little bit in a business that he was involved in, but everybody is taking baselines of these kids when they come in to how they left. And it is supposedly, and the NFL's scary crazy about it.
Yeah,
They see it
absolutely.
as being the next
It is.
tobacco litigation coming down the pike. And Pop Warners are getting involved in it. Because when someone sues somebody because they have cognitive damage from playing football, they're suing everybody down the food chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
It
all the
is
way
a big
down.
issue. Yeah.
And I guess the question is, do we have insurance to cover claims if they start coming down the path?
Well, I mean, you never can answer that question definitively. Do you have enough insurance? But the current program that you have in place will properly cover that type of a claim, and within the limits that you're purchasing currently.
Is it a claims-made policy?
No. This is your policy is an occurrence policy.
Okay.
Which means it would cover the claim when the occurrence happened, and there's an important distinction there.
Okay.
So, meaning that if the concussion happened in 2014, and the claim was made in 2020, the 2014 policy and the company that was insuring the town at the time would cover that claim.
Okay.
Yeah. But that is a big issue right now. It's an issue that the insurance companies, quite honestly, are struggling with.
Yeah.
What would happen, just when you say that, what would happen if, so there was a 5 or 7 or 10-year gap, and the insurance company that we had been using in 2014 is no longer in business or bankrupt, for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's a problem.
It's a problem.
That's why we have to make sure that we deal with, A-rated, financially stable companies. Yes, but that can happen, and that's the problem that any liability insurance company, has to deal with.
And we had a problem with an insurance company, and their rating was downgraded, and Rob worked to find a company that picked up the insurance for the rest of the year with a better rating, and it took us a little bit of time, but as soon as there's an issue, we would address that. That's a really important issue for us.
Would that even, I mean, the 08-09 crisis in the country taught at least me that no institution is impregnable to problems. So you are raising an interesting concern for me, which I don't understand all the different layers of insurance. So it just walk me through a case where it's now 2020, whoever our 2014 carrier, so the kid was in school in 2014, 6, 7, 10 years, 20 years later, hypothetically, something came out, the town gets sued, the insurance carrier is no longer in business or is bankrupt, hypothetically, where would, and we lose a $10 million judgment, right? Where would that money come from in that case?
Okay. In that case, if the company was bankrupt and there was literally, which rarely happens.
I know.
In the insurance world, typically, there's a lot of safeties built into it. There's also reinsurance companies that step in. So you'd have to have sort of a catastrophic collapse. It's almost unforeseeable.
I'm giving a very worst case for the sake of the argument. Yeah.
I think AIG might be an example of where that might have actually happened, close to happening. But even in that case, AIG now is back and better than ever. So there's a lot of safeties built in. The biggest safety is financial stability of the company you have.
You know, insurance companies have to reserve, you know, they reserve properly so that they anticipate, you know, IBNR is a big issue for
No,
them.
I appreciate that part, but I'm just asking, just a pure mechanical question. In spite of everything you just said, the company is bankrupt and no longer in business. There's nobody to talk to, the phone rings and nobody answers it. Is the town on the hook for $10 million or $50 million or $100? I'm
No.
just curious,
It
where
would-
did the money come from?
The way that this program's structured is, okay, Kerma is, the town's, you know, in that case, 500,000, the first 500,000 is the town.
Right.
And Kerma's on the next million. And then we have excess companies, different companies that would be, so so theoretically, you could have Kerma, for example, be out of business, but the excess carrier that's carrying, say, the next 10 million of coverage would hopefully be in place. So you'd be self-insured now for 1.5 million in that case.
Okay, so that's
and the umbrella carrier would be.
We layer the coverage with different.
There's one other thing.
Yeah,
It's a
okay.
little bit more complex. There's claims-made policies, and there's occurrence policies. And there's policies with tails. And so there's a multiplicity. You go into a whole insurance lesson on this subject.
Right, which I'm not looking for.
Which we're not doing
Right.
until
No, I just got
the-
I got an answer.
You don't
I got
want
an answer that satisfied me, which is that it's not one company, that there's a layer.
Yeah, but
after
it
that.
depends on what type of policy it was.
Okay.
If it's a claims policy, you're not covered unless you're covered on the current policy so there's a
Well, if it's
multiplicity.
a claims-made policy, you'd purchase a tail, and you would always buy a
Right.
tail, and then you'd be properly covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions on these items?
Small one from me.
Sure.
Your educational memberships line, why is it going up 40%? Is there some classes that people need to be certified in or something else like that?
On a number of occasions, we've had some issues with individuals, and they've resulted in disciplines or a CHRO complaint or something like that, when I've guaranteed the bodies or the complainants that I would train the person. So I've had to find very inexpensive training, but I want to make sure that I don't have to go through the legal expense again, so I want to make sure that I put these people through the correct training just to make sure that they're better employees and we don't have problems in the future with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll go to the public on this. Seeing none from the public, thank you very much. Thank you, sir, for staying very late tonight.
And I was going to say, when I first came here.
Yeah, no. This is department number 3030. Ms. Holland has been waiting patiently, and we thank her for that. And 3030 is on page 183. Good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
Good, and yourself?
I'm good.
So let's look at your budget and go from there. Anything you need to tell us?
No, it's down.
Okay, thank you for playing our game. No,
You're welcome.
No, it's up.
Aside
It's
from,
up.
aside from salaries, everything that is within my control, those lines are down overall.
Before we get to the, Mr. DeWitt's going to ask this question, so I'll ask him. How's our new purchasing policy doing?
Actually, I wasn't going to ask that, but thank you for asking on my behalf.
It's working very well.
And what's it resulted in? Do we know what it's resulted in terms of savings or in terms of efficiencies, productivity? What's gone on?
It's allowed us, we're not doing redundant work, we're not doing busy work. It's allowed us to focus on bids that are more meaningful, so we're more productive in that aspect. And it's especially important now that we now have 5 building committees up and running. So there's been some work associated with that, and there's more to come. If you look at this budget, if you look at advertising, just in advertising alone, we've reduced the budget by $1,500.
What if, can you point to examples where we've got better bids or better pricing than what we had under the old policy?
I don't know that we've gotten better bids or better pricing, as that we're focusing on work that's going to net us. We're not fiddling around with $7,500 and $8,000 bids.
Okay.
Or bidding items that, for which there is only one source. And the new policy allows us to just go to that one source. We document everything, and we're good.
Are there other questions for this department? Mr. Walsh?
I have a global question. It's not really to Twig, because I've seen it coming up in other departments, and I just want to ask globally, and I guess I'll ask our budget director, the assumption, what happened with the life insurance? Because every department seems to, their life insurance is increasing. Can you tell us the reasons why there's, I mean, they're double-digit increases. Like, this is 42%, or what is it, 87%?
Well, you're going to see life insurance, first let me explain what happened. Department heads have a $150,000 benefit. Up until last year, we were budgeting a $50,000 benefit. So this reflects the $150,000 benefit in 15 over 14. And why it looks so exaggerated in purchasing is because it's relative to 2 employees. If you see it in a department with multiple employees, it will probably be less of a decrease.
So the benefit went from 50
It's the
to
number of
150?
units, the units of coverage, yes.
Benefits didn't change.
The benefits didn't change, it's the units of coverage, up to 150,000.
What does that mean? I don't,
They're eligible for $150,000 $1,000 in coverage.
Were they always eligible for that, though? Right? Is that the question?
They might have been. It came to my attention when we last year discussed the department head benefits, and remember that 3-page document that outlined the benefits? When I read the document, I saw that they were eligible for 150 and wanted to right-size our budget estimates. Up till then, I had only been budgeting 50,000.
Okay. So it's just a change of what the assumption was. Okay, okay.
Can we confirm that? Can we confirm that it was always, that it's not a change in the actual benefit offered, but just a change in the budget?
It was a correction of an error.
Yeah.
Right.
It was.
And is that with the same benefits that's available to the mid-managers?
No.
What does the department heads follow for their benefits? What model do they follow for their benefits? I thought they followed a different, one of the contracts.
There's, for the department heads, there's a separate sheet that's been reviewed extensively here.
Okay.
All right, and that roughly follows the mid-managers, but it's not an exact.
So we follow the mid-managers in that for some of the benefits, but other benefits we don't.
Correct.
And that's your determination?
That has been historically what we've done. We're in the process of reviewing that. I'd expected to make more progress on that. Now that I've got some staff back in my office, we'll look at reinstituting a review of that.
But that's your office review, correct? That's totally within the First Selectman's purview, what benefits we supply to the department heads?
It has been, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions? Mrs. Leclerc?
Will Miss Holland be here other days, or should I ask my questions to her now?
I think she'd like them now.
I'd like them now.
Okay.
She'd like to come back another week.
Is your fuel bidding. Usually you have good luck with bidding for like the rates for oil and stuff. So I was wondering how that's going this year.
It's going pretty well. We timed a trough for vehicle fuel, so we've got very competitive rates for that for the rest of this year, and I believe they go into 2014 and 15. I know it's at least for the first 6 months. I believe it may be the entire year. I'm not 100% sure on that, going from memory. We have natural gas locked in, and we hit some very good pricing for that as well. So everything that we need for 2014, 2015 fiscal year has been purchased, and we got lucky on that one. And we have electricity purchased till December 26th of this year, and I'm shopping now for power.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I also, we did see some positive trends in that area. So all the other department heads were very happy.
Good.
So thank you for all your hard work
You're
on
welcome.
that.
Thank you.
And that worked out very well. Any other questions? We'll go to Mr. Becker.
I mean, just the department head's contract, I mean, not really contract, but guidelines or whatnot. I don't know if we should spend a ton of time on it tonight, but I do think it's come up a number of times, and there seems to be no real check and balance. And I know that now there's going to be, I guess now that you have more staff, the first selectman's going to be working on it again to try to, kind of come to what those terms really should be. But it would think that some of the boards at some stage should have some sort of say in that. So I don't want to, almost 11 o'clock at night, we're in budget, but when we approve the numbers within the budget, in a sense, we okay that whatever's on that document at that point is we're okaying it for the next year. So in the context of the budget, we may want to have at least a little bit more of a conversation at some stage, obviously on a different night, but I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Any other questions, comments? All right. We're going to go to, yes, we'll skip administrative services now. Let's go to department number 1050, pages 80 and 81. Ms. Holland again, welcome.
And this budget is down.
Yes.
The entire thing is down by close to 2%. And owing in large part, we've been working with the new copier company. We're getting able to negotiate better rates for the copiers, and it's paying off.
Any questions or comments on this budget? It's down by 1.7% year over year. Seeing none, I'll go to the public and ask for any comments or questions on purchasing or administrative services. None? Good. We're done with these budgets. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. We're going to go to the Board of Finance. 3130 is the department.
199.
Sorry?
199.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's...
All right. This budget is exactly flat year over year, which means we're not getting increases in pay. Any questions or comments on this budget? Fees and professional services, we're locked in with our auditors on this rate?
Yes.
Okay. Our secretarial services, our minutes, we're okay on that?
Yes.
Okay, no change in rate there. What's the educational and memberships here?
I don't know. It says CAFR in the munis, but I'm not sure what goes through. We'll have to get back to you on that.
And also, we have something for travel and meetings.
That's to,
Sorry.
when we submit our CAFR submission at the end of the year to GFOI, to get it reviewed.
Okay, so
the
that's...
CAFR review.
Yeah.
I know
So they sent us
certifications are
700,
right.
it costs us 725.
725, yes.
Is the exact amount.
Right.
What's travel and meetings?
I think it's a small allowance for mileage.
Who's?
For whom?
Your choice.
I know Hillary used to charge mileage.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps.
As the clerk?
Yeah, that was probably all of his gas that he went around to your houses that I don't do anymore.
Right.
That was worth the $100.
So we should take that
I
out.
have to say that
All right,
that'd be worth the $100 to get that budget book a little earlier. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So Bob, I'd rather keep the $100 in there and guarantee that next year you'll hand deliver the books to the Board of Finance.
Remember, you've got
Might
mileage
happen.
plus time.
That's right.
Okay.
I still think we're getting a bunch of
There's
these
other things we do.
So we have no answer.
Can we take a look at that and just see what's gone in there in the past? Any other questions on this budget?
What are our advertising fees? What do we have to advertise?
We advertise the budget itself. It gets posted.
Just the budget? That's the one time in the paper?
Yeah, that budget
Yeah,
publication.
the 2 pages that open up?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We're good?
We're good.
Okay, let's move on. Well, any questions, comments from the adoring public on this one?
No, not you.
Seeing none, seeing no public. We'll go on to page, we'll go to 3150, which is unemployment compensation. So,
202?
202, thank you. So go right ahead, please.
You can see there the fiscal year 13 actual is 193. The forecast for 14 is about 165. We have the food service closing down. There's a couple of positions there that are anticipated will not be offered jobs by the new vendor. So I just took the 143, estimated 2 people, one of whom makes about $80,000 a year, and rounded to a $200,000 number.
So say that again, I'm sorry, I missed the calculation, sorry.
Current year the current year estimated is 165.
Okay.
There's 2 people at the food service who will not be offered jobs by the new vendor.
Okay.
So one of them's in like in the 80,000 range. Did a quick calculation, that was like $20,000, $25,000. And the other one, I don't really know how much the other person makes, but I just rounded up to 200,000.
But that's assuming the base is going to stay at the 165.
Yes, there's been no significant event, any unusual turnover in the current year, so that's why I made that assumption.
How many people are covered by that 165 right now, do you know?
2,000? Or you mean actual cases or?
Actual cases.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. We get, we get the bills every month, but.
Yep. I was just pointing out this is another one of those accounts, is both the town and the Board of Ed.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Can we just take a look at that and see what cases are on there, what's rolling off?
Yeah, I mean, we look at it every month. I
Okay.
basically have when something actually new that's being done in the last few months. When the bill comes in, I require Cheryl for the town side and someone on the Board of Ed side to sign off on each case to make sure that the name should be there.
We just take a look at that, see how many cases are on, things like that.
Right.
So I know there has been some activity in the past couple of years on both the Board of Ed side and the town side. And I just want to make sure we're not overestimating this going forward. I'm not suggesting we are, I have no idea.
No, either way, it's not going to be a big number.
Right. Mrs. McCarthy-Vahey.
Thank you. So, the food service, you seem pretty clear that there are 2 positions that will be lost, and my understanding from talking with folks who work in food service is that they're still unclear as to what will happen. So is there certainty in terms of the bid and the process, and at what point will those folks be notified?
Well, I don't know what certainty means, but I know what I've been told, and I've been informed that the manager will not be offered because the vendor will bring in their own manager, and there's one support staff person that would be brought in by the vendor, most likely.
And my question is, are the folks who are impacted by this aware of this? And
It's
if
my
they aren't,
understanding
they
they
are
are.
now.
I think that's a
They're
Board
off
of Ed
the
question, actually, not one to the CFO.
So then,
I'll ask them.
Say it again.
spoiler alert.
Oh, we're not live tonight. So they have another day.
What?
We're not live
Right.
tonight.
Okay.
So we bought one day.
So the number of 2 is Mike that came from the Board of Education gave us that number of 2. Gave it to the.
That was communication with it. I haven't,
Oh, okay.
I was trying to address Ms. McCarthy-Vay's point about
Yeah.
communication to the affected people, which is really a function of the Board of Ed, not.
Oh, I
the
thought you were
town.
saying the numbers came from, so the
Yes,
numbers came
yeah.
from the Board of Ed?
Yes.
Okay. What are fees and professional services for unemployment compensation?
We pay a monitoring company.
An administration.
Okay. That's their admin fee
Right.
based on the number of claims that come through?
No, it's a flat fee.
Flat fee?
Okay.
And they basically, they represent us when we have
Hearings?
issues and hearings.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll go to the public. I see nothing there. And now we're going on to debt service, which is 1,030, which is...
307.
Got it on tab.
Yep. 307. Question, does this tie to our waterfall schedule?
Yes, it does.
Any update to this since the budget was prepared, or this still looks good?
No, it still looks good. Basically, it's the waterfall schedule plus $217,000 for the band payment for the July payment, which was the band premium amount, which was not included in the waterfall schedule, minus $1,104,000 use of the bond premium, plus $25,000 fees anticipated for the bond issuance in July.
How much of that bond premium amortization is left after utilization of this 1.1?
I think that uses about half of it.
So there's another 2.2 million left?
1,127,000.
So there's 1,127,000 left. Now, could we, and I'm not suggesting this, it's one of those informational, don't read into it. If we chose to utilize that in this year's budget, if we had to address that insurance issue on the Board of Ed side, the healthcare issue, could we do that? Is there any accounting
Yes.
reason why we couldn't?
Yeah, I've amortized it over the 3 years, which is the IRS recommendation.
Okay.
Right.
But there's nothing you know
I
of
don't
that-
think there's no illegal.
Okay. Go
I
ahead.
had asked during, not the
I
last
remember.
presentation, the presentation before, when we were still up in the air about how we were going to manage that number with the special education excess costs that of the 17
Right.
unknown students coming through, whether we could use the bond premium towards that. And we were supposed to get an answer from bond counsel about whether we could. What was that answer? Because we never got that. I mean, I know you're not planning on using it. And
Well, no, I think my answer would be the same. I don't remember that I indicated I was going to go to bond counsel. But the answer is IRS regs, 3 years is the ideal way to do it, but you can do it. But if you like, I can certainly make inquiry to confirm that.
Okay, so we can, is the rule on that, we could take it 3 years or less? We could take it all in 1 year? We could take it whenever we want to take it?
If you take it in more than 3 years,
Yeah.
there's special tracking.
Okay.
All right, so which I don't want to get into.
Yep.
So to
Understood.
me, it's 3 years or less.
Okay. And we had made
And
a
the
policy decision?
standard
Yep.
is, when you talk to bond counsel, 3 years.
Mr. Brockfeld, do you have your hand up,
Nope.
or is it just?
No,
Okay.
appreciate it.
Any other questions, comments?
Just
Mr. Walsh,
confirm
you
that
done?
your
Please.
your question going to be followed up on, that we can definitely, if we decided to do something to solve this Board of Education,
To help some.
to help solve the Internal Service Fund issue, or you're going to find out whether we definitely could use it if we
Yes, sir.
wanted to?
I will confirm my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not guaranteeing I'm correct.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this? This includes everything that we've approved so far that has gone through the town bodies for the,
Adjusted for the refi.
yeah, thank you. All right, seeing nothing, I'm going to go to the public. Seeing nobody. Mr. Dombrowski, who's part of the administration, we'll come back to the board, and do I have a motion?
Nobody.
Do I have a motion? Mr. DeWitt? Do I have a second? Mr. Becker? All in favor of adjournment? Those opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
Has anybody ever opposed an adjournment? That's interesting.
No.